Next, as part of our Campaign 2012 coverage, our contributing correspondent Jeff Berkowitz talks with Dr. Aire Friedman, Republican candidate for the Illinois State Senate in the 29th District. This runs about 30 minutes.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and we'll be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Dr. Aire Friedman, who wants to be the next state senator from the 29th District. He is a Republican from
Highland Park, sir.
I was going to say that, but it just sounded so wrong.
There are some of us in Highland Park.
Okay. There are some Republicans in Highland Park.
Yes.
See, really, I knew it was Highland Park. It's written there, Highland Park. I've seen it, but I just didn't know there was a Republican in Highland Park. You're it. Okay, so we've clarified that. There's one Republican in Highland Park. No, but all kidding aside, the 29th District is on the North Shore, or at least much of it's on the North Shore, I guess. Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, big part of the 29th. And as we said, Highland Park and Highwood, Deerfield, Bannockburn, all of those areas, I think, are in the 29th.
Correct.
And other areas partially in the 29th, Northbrook, Wheeling, Arlington Heights, Prospect Heights, Buffalo Grove, Palatine, Glenview, Mount Prospect. Sounds like the train stop on the North Line. Okay. And Susan Garrett, a regular attendee of the show here on Public Affairs, going back to when Susan first ran for state rep in 1998 and then became the state senator in 2002. I think that's when she beat Kathy Parker, who
Correct.
had been that. So once upon a time, these seats were in Republican hands. There's been some redistricting, so they're not quite what they were. But as we tape the show on August 1, 2012, the nation and Illinois and the local area, they're kind of gripped with not just is it Republican, is it Democrat, but they're thinking about some very big issues. You were saying just before the show, I said, what's this about? You said pensions.
If I had to answer what's the question people ask me the most often, it's how are you going to fix the pensions?
Yeah, and so how are you going to fix the pensions?
It's a straightforward problem from a math standpoint. It's not a straightforward problem from a human standpoint. The reality is that the pension system we have for public employees in Illinois is unsustainable. And nobody disagrees with that. The governor agrees with it. Speaker Madigan agrees with it. State Senator President John Cullerton agrees. Everybody agrees that what we have.
And the Republicans, Leader Cross
absolutely.
in the House.
The Republicans are the advocates for
Chris
fixing
Redonio,
it.
who would be your leader if you
course.
win in this race. The Republican leaders in House and Senate, they agree.
Absolutely.
So the four tops, as we used to call them, the four leaders, and the governor, all agree.
Absolutely.
So it's a piece of cake. Why don't you just sit down, work out the details?
If you look at the political spectrum of what people want to do, people like me believe that you have to take some of the ideas that have worked in the private sector to fix private sector retirement plans and apply them to what's going on in Illinois pension plans. On the other side, the extreme side, you have people saying that the only reason we have a problem at all is that we've kept taxes artificially low for too long and the public pension system hasn't been properly funded.
And who says that?
I've heard union spokesmen, public employee union spokesmen say that.
Okay. Like Henry Barrett from AFSCME on this show, on Public Affairs. And we give credit. Henry's very candid, very blunt. He says you need a progressive income tax. You have to amend the Illinois Constitution to do that. Tax the rich, close those loopholes. You'll be gushing with tax revenue, and everybody can be paid whatever they want to pay them for pensions. And could Henry be wrong?
He's very wrong. Even if you just taxed the wealthy at a higher rate, there's not enough revenue by a long stretch to cover this problem. It's much bigger than people think it is. We talk about $83 billion in pension debt that Illinois owes.
Underfunded.
Pension unfunded mandates, meaning that's how much we would have to come up with to fully fund the pension system for the future.
Right.
It's $83 billion unfunded, which is the number we hear a lot. That number is wrong.
Because the general revenue fund budget, the annual budget, which is really
$32 billion.
Yeah, that's how much, in a sense, it's hard to know the total budget and fixed thing and cap costs, et cetera, but But that's what most people say. Well, that's what the Illinois spends each year.
But let's talk about
So they
the-
spend $33 billion, and they're $83 billion underfunded on pensions.
Well,
2.5 years of the budget, in a sense.
I don't agree with that number. That number is low.
The 83 is low.
83 is low. Two things. So let's talk about the scope of this problem. It's gargantuanly larger than that. Turns out that the government's going to change how we actually calculate that number. The government accounting standards for public pensions is changing next year. Also, we have an unrealistically high expectation for how much we make off the money we have in the pension system now, the returns on it. We're guessing it's 8.5%. I'd like to meet somebody who's making 8.5% off their investments right now.
Yeah, I mean, even these folks who do, they do institutional investments, they maybe make more than the average investor, they get some good deals. But I think most people think it's probably more like 7.5% or 7% at top.
California's pension system this year made 1%.
Well, this year. So, I mean, if you go into California and say, what have you made over the last 5 years, what would be the answer?
It's less than 7%. It's less than 7%.
So you're saying once you change that to a lower rate of return, it means you're even more underfunded than they're saying.
So if you combine those two factors, it's well over $100 billion that we owe. It's worse than that, because all we're talking about when we talk about that are the 5 state systems. Local pension systems are dramatically underfunded in the state too.
So, but the state is, now when you say you want to also talk about the local, then, but that's something else. The state,
not something else.
Well, it's something else in the
Yes.
sense the state government, you're saying, isn't 83 billion underfunded, it's 100 billion. Now you're saying there's city funds that are also underfunded, but it's not that responsibility of the state government.
No, but it's the responsibility of the state taxpayers. So when we talk about
taxpayers in the state, not qua, you understand, qua,
Right,
not qua state taxpayers.
yeah, well, they are,
They're city taxpayers.
but they're the same people.
Yeah.
It's the same pocket.
Yeah, the
And let's
people in Illinois.
Let's be clear. When you say things like the people of Illinois have had their taxes artificially low for too long because we haven't properly funded the
Who
pension
says
system.
that?
The U.S. said that on more than one occasion.
Hey, by the
And-
way, your opponent's Julie Morrison, right?
Correct.
And so what does Julie say about this?
I don't.
About this, does she go along with the unions and say they should just have more money, more revenue?
Well, certainly they're supporting her.
They are. Any specific unions?
She has received contributions from AFSCME, from SEIU, from various teacher unions, and
So this is she's a traditional Democrat with traditional labor support.
correct.
I'm not saying that's wrong or right, that's just the
But
way it is
it is the way it
traditionally.
is.
You're not getting support, you're a Republican.
I am not getting support from the
Republicans
public
don't
employees.
traditionally get support from unions, especially the public sector unions.
Correct. Her position.
Does that mean that, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt, but does that mean, do you think, that she's somewhat beholden and she's less likely to take actions that the unions would
I would
oppose?
never say that somebody's beholden for taking contributions.
Because you're going to have to take some money, too,
I
from
take
somebody.
money from various organizations, too. I get money from the Illinois State Medical Society. I've received contributions from the Chamber of Commerce, from the National Federation
And you
of
don't think
Independent
you're
Businesses.
beholden to the Chamber
No,
of Commerce, to the Medical Society?
I'm just
Corporation?
grateful that they think that I'm somebody who holds similar values.
And that's what it is. You're not changing your views for them. They think you have views that they like. They give you money. You're saying that the unions think that Julie has views they like. They give her money.
I think that's the right
Fair?
conclusion to draw. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk again. So we were saying what the scope of this problem is. When we say things like the taxpayers of Illinois have had their taxes kept artificially low for too long, we have to talk about what the taxpayers of Illinois actually owe. The local pension plans, Cook County, Lake County, all the other counties, all the municipalities, police funds, we don't know how much that number is, but it's at least $100 billion more, which means that the people of Illinois are on the hook for $200 billion in unfunded pension debt as we sit right now. That cannot possibly be paid off.
So what's the solution?
The solution is we have to reform the pension system. We have to bring those numbers down.
Reform means did break promises?
Yeah, absolutely.
Break some promises.
As awful as that is, look, I am the son.
Cannot pay what people were
It's
told
not
they were going to get
payable.
paid.
It's not payable. I didn't make those promises, and I never would
Yeah,
have.
okay.
Those promises were pandering. They were frankly, they were never possibly going to
So
be
on the
fulfilled in
state
the first
level,
place.
let's go back to the state level. What has to be done there to reduce those benefits?
Right. So first of all, Jeff, I'm the husband of a public school teacher. My wife was a CPS teacher. My mother's a teacher. I've got a brother-in-law who's one of my best friends in the world, who is a professor at Eastern. All of them, my wife and my brother-in-law, are invested in the pension system.
Is your wife currently a public
She's
school
not, but
teacher?
she's taken time off to raise our family. So I know how important the situation is for people who are in the public employee pension systems, but that, in fact, they're part of the reason why it needs to be reformed. If we allow things to continue the way they are, they're not going to receive, the younger teachers are never going to receive anything for their investment. So everything has to be done. You and I have talked about them. Cost of living increases, COLAs, have to be decreased. They can't be compounded one upon another, which results in some very astonishingly high pensions for the time that people worked.
They can't be compounded.
So as opposed, when you add 3% of a cost of living increase now each year, the next one is based upon that 3% being added to what you were originally making.
You can't do that. It has to be simple.
Right.
Simple interest.
Right.
All right, and
There's
then,
more.
But on the COLA now, it's a misnomer because it's automatic.
It's not
That
based
is
on inflation.
3% a year, no matter what. Inflation could be 1.5%. It'll be 3. The Senate bill that passed the Senate but didn't come up in the House, what was that COLA? in that bill?
I don't remember the number it brought it down to. Was it 1.5? I think it brought it down to 1.5.
I think it was half of the CPI or 3%, whichever is less. All right. So if the CPI was like 3%, it would be 1.5 or 3, whichever is less. So it would bring the COLA down to 1.5.
And it also,
that would be dramatic, and it would not be compounded.
not compounded. That's the critical component
Right.
of it. We need to.
And you favor that.
I would favor that.
And your opponent, Julie Morrison?
I don't know.
It doesn't say that on her website. It doesn't say specifically whether she'd favor that or not. Right?
What Mrs. Morrison has said is that she believes the only kind of pension reforms we can institute, and I'm going to say this as best I can, remembering it as best I can only be the ones that the unions have voluntarily agreed to.
So she doesn't want to mandate something. She doesn't want to say this is the way it has to be. You want to negotiate with the unions, and they, according to her, she's reading the Constitution as not allowing you to force these changes because of what it says about that pension benefits will not be decreased, right?
The reality of it is that whether we change the Constitution or not, these pension benefits will not be available to the current generation of teachers and university professors and everybody else. In fact, the teachers' retirement system issued a report that said that regardless of changes to law, they were not going to be able to sustain pension benefits with the level of funding they have now.
So she says double dipping must cease. Okay. Can't have two pensions you're dipping into. Pension options for current teachers should be encouraged through incentives, but must not be mandated. Right. Okay. So that's kind of what we're told about pensions. It's not very complete. So we don't know whether she'd want to, for instance, well, you would favor reducing increasing the retirement age, right?
The ultimate solution is to move public employees to 401k style defined contribution plans, just like the private sector has.
So the state says, we'll put in X amount, you manage it, and if things go well, you get a lot. If not, you don't get so much.
I have a 401k
defined contribution,
plan.
not a defined
Correct.
benefit.
I have a 401k plan. It's a great plan.
So you want to move toward that, but this year, if you were there in the Senate, okay, and that vote came up, would you have voted yes or no on the legislation that passed the Senate pension reform but didn't come up in the House?
I mean, I would vote yes, but the Senate plan is pretty minimalistic.
Because?
Well, it only goes after 2 of the 5 plans.
And it only deals with the COLA, right? It doesn't do anything about the retirement age. Would you say the retirement age has to go up?
It has to.
Okay. Doesn't do anything about employee contributions. Would you say they have to go up too?
They do have to go up. Look,
and Julie Morrison is your opponent. Does she say that employee contributions have to go up?
I have not heard her say that.
Okay, and it doesn't say that on her website.
As far as I've seen, it does not.
I don't see it here, okay. Because that would be mandating something, and she's saying you have to negotiate these things. You can't just mandate them. Now, folks, you might wonder, where is Julie? Well, we would like her to be here. I've invited her now 4 separate occasions. Recently, this date we invited her for. We had 2 hours to choose from, and I said whoever shows up we're going to go with. And next week we gave her a choice, 2 separate hours. And then prior, over the last, 6 to 8 months, 2 occasions. And so we haven't been able to get her here. We're hopeful that we'll have her here in the future. We're hopeful she'll sit down with her opponent, Dr. Aire Friedman, because not just because it's interesting to me, which I think it would be, and interesting to the viewers and interesting to the voters. You know, if you go down to Springfield, senators have to debate. They have to have exchanges with people within their party and with people with outside their party. And they got to stand up to Mike Madigan, who's in the House, or Senate President Cullerton, who's the Senate President. Or Republicans may have to stand up to their leader, Radonio, and Tom Cross. And so you want to judge how they do this, if they're going to represent you. And so we hope Julie will be able to come out here with them, without her opponent, just as he said.
To be fair, she would not have been able to make today's event because of a personal matter that had to do with campaigning.
No, to be fair, she had said no to that before that personal event came up.
Okay. I wasn't with you in the conversations.
Yeah. So, and we're with her and our sympathy with her in that personal event. But to be fair, we asked her and she said no prior to that event occurring. Okay. So, anyway, but the point is, if you're wondering, we want to be fair and balanced here. And so if you're saying, well, why isn't Julie here? Why don't you give her a chance? We gave her the chance. And we think it's important that you judge Dr. Aire Friedman's views relative to his opponent. So I'm making the best effort. I went to the website. I asked before this event happened, I said, look, I'll go out to Julie and I'll interview her, and then I'll know for sure what her views are. And they didn't want to do that. They said, submit written questions. Well, it's like interrogatories in the law. You learn things from a dialogue. You don't just, anyway. But I actually was going to try to do that, but I hadn't heard back. So the point is, this is important stuff. You're stating your views on pensions, okay? There are a lot of people who are in the Senate and in this, and they're not stating their views. So that's to be applauded, whether people agree with you or disagree with you. It is incumbent on candidates for office to give their positions, and they should do it in multiple fora or forums. TV, radio, coffees. They shouldn't say, well, we don't do TV, or don't do radio, or we only do ads. Because, well, anyway. Okay, so on pensions, you want to increase the retirement age, you want to increase the employee contributions, you want to modify the COLA. Eventually, you want to go toward a 401k.
If we don't.
And you want all 5 funds to be covered. That's why, Senator Dan Duffy said that legislation that passed was a joke because it only covered 2 of the 5 funds.
One of Dan Duffy's greatest features is that he's a very straightforward man.
Yeah, he said it was a joke. And he said he actually voted for it because he understood, in his view, he said Cullerton's only doing that so his members could say they voted for reform because they knew it wasn't going to come up in the House because the House had adjourned before they passed it. So I'm not saying it's a joke. That's what Duffy said. We'd like Senator President Cullerton to come on and talk about it himself. We're fair and balanced here.
The most egregious thing that came out of that session, by the way, was on the House side, which was the attempt to have a pension shift, which is where they would have some of the pension unfunded debt be placed on local school districts and municipalities.
Well, in a sense, that seems reasonable because they're deciding that. Look, if you're on the school board,
I wouldn't agree with you that it's reasonable.
Well,
I'll tell you why in a second.
Okay, but let me just lay it out. If you're in the school board, one of the major things you do, it's usually every 3 or 4 years in the suburbs, upstate, maybe it's the same downstate. I was on the Winnetka School Board. You decide the teacher's contract. And you decide the salaries to be paid each year, and they do it based on experience, not based on performance, which was stupid, idiotic, but that's a whole other matter. So they decide, what the actual levels are, and then each year with experience you get more because everybody knows that's the way it should be done. We pay doctors like that, right? No. So each year of your medical experience, you become better and you get more money.
Right.
We don't do that.
We do not do that.
But that's what we do with our teachers. In business we do that. No, we don't do that. In law, we don't do that. So only in teaching do we do that. But putting that aside, so you decide that if you're on the board, but then the state kind of decides the pension structure. And you decide, though, if you pay higher salaries, you're going to pay higher pensions. So there's kind of a mixture there. And what some people say is we should try to align it more closely and let the people who are deciding what the pensions are going to be, let them have the tax burden. So if you're elected board members, say in Highland Park, we're deciding the pensions for the teachers in Highland Park, how much to pay, then shouldn't those taxes come from those people in Highland Park because the representatives are deciding they pay as to being spread across the state.
So
that's the whole notion of the cost
two
shift.
things wrong with that argument. The first is that we've completely messed this system up. We've created a gargantuan unfunded debt. We have, essentially, it's in full collapse
When
mode.
you say we
As a state.
Okay.
We've allowed this to happen. We've elected the people who...
the people who were elected did
Right,
this.
they're our representatives. They've received our votes. That's, we have to take some level of
Well.
responsibility as a state. I understand.
They may not have received my vote.
Understood. What has to happen first is that we get the system back on track. We cannot put people's homes, which is what we're talking about, up as collateral for a collapsing pension system. We can't do it. I won't vote for it. It's unacceptable. It's morally inappropriate.
Wait a second, we can't do what?
Can't put people's homes up as collateral.
Who says we're putting up their
That's
homes
what's
up for?
the first lien on your house is your property tax.
No, but
They're going to shift some of this debt that they've run up over the years through mismanagement, through inappropriate
originally,
promises, through underfunding.
shouldn't have been being paid. Shouldn't have
So
been
let's-
paid yearly
Let's-
by those people who are paying their property taxes. They got a benefit. They didn't have to pay. It was spread across all taxpayers. So for 20 years they get a benefit. They shouldn't have. And you're saying they should get it for life now?
Do you want the long list of things that should have happened in the pension system? Because there's a whole long list.
No,
of them.
but my point is, people were getting a benefit in the sense that they were getting to give their teachers who are teaching in their area higher pensions, and they're spreading that cost among a larger group of people.
Yeah, and that's the way the system was drawn. It's one of the many features of the system that was
But it's
wildly
it's
inappropriate.
not efficient. You
Right,
would
so-
agree. You would agree it's not
Oh,
efficient,
it's
right?
an appallingly bad system.
So we should change it, but yet you don't want to change it.
I absolutely want to change, which means reform the pension benefits.
The
And
whole
then,
thing, okay.
and next step, then here's another reason why. So that's the first step. We fix it. We don't just take a portion of this mandate. Look, what we're talking about when we talk about a pension
Well, no,
shift,
we're doing-
let me finish.
Yeah,
What
okay.
we're talking about when we talk about the pension shift is we are talking about the fact that, well, we already raised your income tax, which largely went into the pensions. We're going to shift some of this debt that you never tolerate another income tax increase to pay onto your school districts, and they will have to raise your property tax. It's simply another way of taxing us so that we don't have to reform the pension system. The other problem with it is that in Illinois, we have 7,000 individual units of government that can tax and give pensions and have employees. The idea that, this whole idea of a pension shift is that, well, you'll go to your school district and get angry if they allow these things to happen. But there's too many school districts, too many park boards, too many cities for anybody to keep track of, and they are largely anonymous and not accountable. So I'm also not liking the idea of having local boards, school boards, make these decisions because nobody knows who's on them and how to vote for them, and they're not accountable. So those are two problems with the idea of this shift. But the biggest is, I will not vote for something that will inevitably result in people's property taxes being increased to pay for an unreformed pension system.
Julie Morrison, she agrees with you on this?
I don't know the answer to that
Probably
question.
she does. Probably it would be, your voters would be hurt, her voters would be hurt. Although Republicans are they have more representatives in the House, more senators in the Senate, in the upstate area that's affected. This is not, we won't go into the arcane reasons, this does not affect folks who have been in the city of Chicago.
Correct.
So Republicans have
Suburban
more of
and
their
downstate.
power, suburban and downstate. So Republicans view this as a poison pill that Mike Madigan put in there to block reform. He doesn't want reform, they contend, because the Democrats, the labor unions would be upset by the reform we've talked about. They're giving money to people to oppose that. If they passed, they'd be less enthusiastic about giving money to Democrats in 2012. They say Speaker Mike put it in as a poison pill,
Yeah.
knowing the Republicans like you don't want to do this for, he would say, political reasons.
I don't read that deeply into
Okay.
it. I simply think that they want to take a part of this pension debt, put it onto the local school districts, and whatever the school districts want to do, lower services, raise property taxes, it's inevitably going to be raised property taxes, it's simply a way of washing more
I
money
think we've
into the
given
system.
people a good idea of your views. I think of some of Julie Morrison's views, subject to her coming on here and clarifying, so we'll get to hear from her directly. And you said this election is about pensions. We've spent about 25 minutes on pensions,
Okay.
25 minutes. So we've done it right, 80%. Now there are a few other issues here.
Okay.
Let's do sort of a lightning round on the other issues.
All right.
Taxes. If you were there 2 years ago when the legislature to increase the income tax for individuals and corporations, right? Mm-hmm. And that was sort of lame ducks who passed it, people who weren't going to be around. You would have voted against that, right?
I would have voted against it.
Your opponent, Julie Morrison, how would she have voted?
I don't know the answer to that
It
question.
sounds on the website she would have voted for it because she said, we have to do the prudent thing, we have to be responsible. And that legislation, that tax increase sunsets unless they do something. Much of it, not all of it, will go away. Mm-hmm. And she says she's hopeful that we'll do the right thing so it can go away, but she doesn't say whether she wants it to.
Sure.
It doesn't sound like somebody who's as against that tax increase, certainly, as you are.
Well,
fair?
I
know you don't want to speak for your opponent, but I'm just trying to do a fair reading.
But I don't
that
know
sounds
the
like a fair reading, based on the website, because I haven't
my
talked
campaign has people who are my supporters have asked her that question over time and not received an answer either. But it's more than that. The question is not just would you let it sunset, would you vote to repeal it, and do you understand that it's killing jobs in Illinois? We talk about what does it take to get Illinois back on track. What makes a business want to relocate to Illinois? It's certainly not increased taxes.
Lower taxes, less pension liability, less restriction, less burden, et cetera.
All of those things for business.
Okay.
And
you favor that, and you're not sure, or you're saying it doesn't sound to you as if your opponent agrees with you on those things?
Well, it doesn't, but again,
we'll have the debate and find out.
The organizations and that around the state, the pro-business organizations around the state are supporting me.
Here's one thing that, and her website, what is it? I don't know. Julie Morrison for Senate.
Julie Morrison for State Senate.
For State Senate. Okay. And your website is?
Mine is friedmanforsenate.com.
Okay. Now, on her website, it says the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, a statement of principle which she believes in, is that convicted felons, convicted domestic abusers, terrorists, and people found to be dangerously mentally ill should not be allowed to buy, own, or carry a gun.
I agree with those statements.
Completely. Right.
Doesn't everybody
Wouldn't
agree with
everybody?
those statements?
I don't, yeah.
No, I mean, when we talk about guns, everybody wants effective gun control that respects people's rights to keep and bear arms, but prevents people who should not own guns from carrying them or owning them.
And the crucial part there is people who are dangerously mentally ill. We had discussion of this in Illinois a few years back. Who should be able to get guns? How do we determine if somebody's mentally ill to the extent that they shouldn't have guns? We should look at that legislation. We should determine whether it's appropriate, and if not, make it more restrictive.
We had a very...
Do you hear any of that discussion going on at this point from the legislature?
No.
So you, perhaps, and Julie should both say, let's have that discussion.
We should have the discussion. I'm a pediatrician. I spent residency training and a couple of years working in the emergency rooms at the University of Chicago Children's Hospital on the South Side. So I have literally seen gun violence and its effect on children firsthand, including children who have passed away from gun violence under my care. I am a strong proponent of gun control laws that would effectively decrease violence so long as they respect people's Second Amendment rights. Would concealed carry decrease violence? In the states that have concealed carry, there's controversy, but it has not been shown to increase violence. All but one state, all but Illinois, have some form of concealed carry, right? Every other state allows properly trained, carefully vetted, background check citizens with training to have licenses to carry firearms. In a sense, we're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, Dr. Aire Friedman. He is running for the state Senate in the 29th District.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.